Let's start with a fun one. What are some of your most memorable pitches, and why did they stand out?
I can't make eye contact, so you should start.
Anyone.
We just had a coffee and we're talking about this, so
You know,
Go.
one of
I have a
them.
good one.
One of them was
I'll let you start it.
This one's. I think it was a good pitch. It was actually a good pitch. I don't want to take any credit away from you because you guys bought and developed it. But there was a time where Matthew McConaughey came in and decided to pitch.
Quick interruption. David used to work, before he was in NBC, he used to work at the Fox network.
Yes.
And I work at 20th Century Fox, the studio side. So we were bringing a pitch into his network. So cut to the story.
Yeah. So Matthew McConaughey and his brother Rooster McConaughey were coming. I feel like if any room knows all that, it's you guys. But he came in pitching an animated show based on Rooster's life because he is an eccentric character. And he decided to come in with Rooster and a case or two cases of Miller Lite. First, to illustrate that Rooster's son is really named Miller Lite. I think it's like Miller Lite McConaughey.
Miller Lite McConaughey.
So awesome.
And then proceeded.
Trademarked.
Yeah. Proceeded to pass out beers to everybody in the pitch and refill in the middle of the pitch as it was going on. So I've been drinking during pitches, and I've had a beer in the same room as Matthew McConaughey, who would.
So bring liquor to your pitch.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway.
It doesn't always work, but the picture's actually good. I mean, it's hard to fake a real life story. You know, the comedy is just inherent. And, you know, Rooster and his whole story out in Midland and his family, it reeked of comedy and animation, so it was a no-brainer. It made sense.
I will say this because it's not as if bringing, stuff to pitches works all the time, but like Grant was saying, he was the kind of guy who would go to a business meeting for all intents and purposes and bring beer and think it was the right thing to do, and his character was all for it, so it kind of fit in with the pitch.
Most of our notes calls on that project that we eventually got into, I think Rooster was either at a bar or a Mexican restaurant where he just drank margaritas in Midland. Yeah, made it fun.
So good.
I've also heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, but that Jason Katims, who obviously did Friday Night Lights and Parenthood, some of my favorites, cries during pitches.
Jason Katims can do whatever he wants in any pitch ever. I hope that that's true.
Yeah, me too. Can you imagine?
Cry along with him.
I'd watch him read the phone book. What would you say is the biggest mistake people often make when they're in the pitch process, when they're in the room?
I mean, I'll speak just for what we're looking for. I mean, one thing that I wouldn't call it a mistake, but one thing that just doesn't work for us is, people often come in and they'll have, they'll pitch out, here's a really interesting world, here's an interesting character in that world, and, and then they'll say some version of, and then we can go anywhere. We could do 100 episodes of whatever. And I think that works if you're doing procedural shows, certainly, but since that's not what we're doing, usually I like to know, that there's something specific that you've got to say, whether it's a theme or an arc, not that you're going to know exactly, what the cliffhanger in season 4 is going to be, because a lot's going to change between now and then, but yeah, certainly that you got that kind of guiding principle and theme to what you're trying to say with your story.
Yeah. I only want to piggyback on that just because, in the same sense for comedy, it's fine to be flexible with your pitches. We're not asking you to pitch every single thing out, but for comedy, a lot of times we ask, are you thinking single cam or multicam, or where does it live most of the time? And a lot of times people, they want to sell and they think we're asking for them to be flexible and saying, it could be either single or multi. And for us, it's a little bit of a red flag because if you don't have it in your head already, it doesn't mean we can't or ask you to change it later, or there's not a world in which it works both ways, but we like people to come in and know kind of where their head is at to begin with.
I think all of us can probably agree too that there is such a thing as being too well rehearsed. There's nothing as off-putting as when folks come in to pitch and they either have like a song and dance routine or they're basically doing a stage play in front of you where they stand up and you're left sort of like this. It's just, you sort of forget what they're saying because you're so focused on the routine and the sort of, the gimmick of it all. So just straightforward, get to the point, get to the characters. I think that works best.
I think so too. I think I'm a drama executive, though I cover girls and developed girls, which is a half hour. But I'm a drama executive, and for me, sort of a combination of what these guys are saying. When you beat out the pilot beat for beat, that sort of doesn't work either. Like, I think the best thing for maybe all of us is when you come in and you know the story so well, you're burning to tell it. Those are when you can put all the materials down and just tell a story and really want to tell the story and ask a question that you're going to explore over the course of the series. Like, really just we can tell if you don't feel it. We can tell if it's been put together and sort of like overdone or whatever. Like just if you just tell your story, just tell your story and like look at us and, you know, that's how we feel most engaged. Just like when you're beating out pitch, like we're development executives. We can work on the pilot. We can work on the beats of the plot. We can figure that out. Like just if you have a question or something personal that you really want to say with your show, that's where the pitch should live, I think.
But I will say this though, because we get this question all the time, and I think it depends with the executive, but a lot of times, I mean, you guys are performing a little bit during the pitch, and a lot of people ask whether or not it's okay to read. There are a lot of people that we've bought pitches from, and this has gone on a series, who have absolutely read word for word. Off the top of my head, David Casp, who did Happy Endings and Marry Me for Us, admits at the very beginning, I'm really nervous right now, I'm going to read this whole thing. What he's reading is funny, he's a talented writer, and he, like Kat's saying, is, if we're asking questions, able to answer anything, because he's pitching what he wants to say. He's pitching that Marry Me specifically was based on him and Casey and how they were engaged in their early stages of their marriage. So reading is completely fine as long as you know you still know the material and can answer the questions.
And I think that's, you know, building on that, I think that's why you see so many of these semi-autobiographical shows on the air right now, because that's obviously what's more passionate about than your own life. I mean, do you think that, you know, I mean, that's timeless?
Yep. And you're living it, so it keeps going and going and going. So to your point about, you know, you kind of don't know where it's going to go. That's okay. That's okay. Like you sort of have to have a vision, but I prefer it if you're living it and sort of writing it as you're experiencing it. Like obviously, it's not. It can be anecdotal or whatever. Like you could put, it doesn't have to be. You can set it in Westeros. Like that's fine as long as it's personal for you. You know.
It's that age-old adage of write what you know, which
Yeah.
is very true in TV, even in animation, where you can go very heightened and big, obviously. But if you look at the classics, The Simpsons, it was based on Matt Groening's family, and South Park, that's where Trey Parker, he grew up in Colorado. And then even King of the Hill, Mike Judge, local Texan, you know, those are the people he knew, and that's what he wrote about, and it works.
I mean, shifting it a little bit, how do you know when a pitch is right for your network?
I'll start it off because I don't have one network because I'm at a studio, so we're pitching, you know, Fox is the main buyer of animation for, you know, adult animation, their Sunday night block. But we'll also go to TBS, we've done deals with Comedy Central, IFC, MTV, we're in the process of trying to do something with. So there are other outlets. So when I'm buying, I'm really thinking what's a great show that is broad enough that it can work anywhere, which is tough because cable networks obviously want something that doesn't feel like a Fox show. But then you have to think, all right, who is going to be the biggest buyer? Most of the time it's Fox. So I usually wear that hat when I'm in a pitch of sort of, all right, what is Fox going to say to this? What questions are they going to ask? What are they looking for? But sometimes you have to take a shot and, you know, gamble like, hey, if this doesn't work at Fox, this could be a great TBS show. So I can't speak to, as a network, what we look for. So it's a little bit of everything. It's a little bit murkier, I think, than what you guys probably have to look for.
Yeah, and I think the reason I hesitate is just because, well, first of all, I could talk the entire time, so I want to give other people chances. But yeah, but when you're at a broadcast network, and I've been at 2 now, you know, a broadcast hit on Fox should, in my mind at least, work on any other network. Modern Family could work on any other networks. It might not be exactly the same, and might not be in the same place, but you know, a broadcast hit should feel, to a certain extent, like a broadcast hit. Things are, I know we're going to get it to at some point. Things are changing rapidly right now, so that's changing a little bit, and we're having to brand ourselves, and each network has a little bit of a sub-brand of themselves, but so then what happens is you have to know whether or not you think it could be a broad hit, because eyeballs are still the way we make our money. But then it also becomes internally, can I get this past my bosses? Is this something they're going to respond to? What have they told me they like? What do they see doing in the drama world that they want to make the network? And it's that sort of thing, knowing, you know, very early on, kind of, okay, I like this. In order to get it through my bosses, I have to do X, Y, or Z, or this is just not something that works here.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's a little different. I mean, I can't speak for Kathleen, but just being on the premium side, you know, inherent in that is that the type of stuff that we're doing is just different. I mean, when there's no advertising, the cadence of storytelling is very different in terms of the act structures, and even just the way that it builds, because, again, you're not doing a procedural, and you want something, at least for us, we do want things that are heavily serialized. I mean, even most of the half hours that we've started getting into have some element of serialization to them as well. So that's definitely something that you're looking for. And then, you know, I think it's an exciting time, at least for me, to be on the development side at Stars, because the definition of what we're doing has been expanding a little bit. And I think, it does kind of go back to what I was talking about of, we don't have a really narrow perspective on what we will do, what we won't do. Obviously, we want to try to have programming that's going to speak to a premium audience, but there's, many different demographics, many different types of audiences within that. And, certainly you look at something like Outlander, which is that and White Queen, kind of the first times as a network that we had a primarily female audience for a show. That was a really exciting thing for us. But, that show is very different than Black Sails, it's very different than Power. And I think that's kind of an exciting thing. It gives you the flexibility that, if you can find a really great story, and again, a showrunner that has something to say, whether an arc or a theme, and can speak to an audience, that's what you're really looking for.
How would you guys say that increased competition from the streaming side, like Netflix and Amazon, as well as all these new cable networks like WGN getting into original scripted stuff, is really changing the buying process? And do you guys ever find yourself defensively buying?
Yes. I mean, we still want to win.
Mm-hmm.
It's much different now. When I started HBO, there weren't these. I was set there started 7 years ago. It was just such a different game.
Yeah.
Now it's like, what are there, 64 buyers or something like that? It's so great. It's a great time to be a writer, producer, director, piece of talent. Such a great time. It's a horrible time to be us, because you're like, oh, I don't know if this pitches HBO, or I don't know if this idea is particularly going to work for us. And the agents are like, well, Netflix is giving us a 12 episode series order, and you're like, but I maybe want this, and what do we do? And it's much more competitive. And look, a rising tide lifts all boats, but I will tell you, it's tough. That's why I hesitate to answer the question before, because I'm like, we're still figuring out what keeps us, unique and branded in this marketplace where a lot of places are doing really good things.
I think it's exciting, though, because I feel like, I don't know if you guys have had this as well. This may be total coincidence, but I like to think that it's not, that in the past 4 or 6 months, we've heard a lot of really great material, read a lot of really great scripts. And I think it's because there is a lot of competition. It's forcing everyone to really raise the bar, because, we hear a lot of great stuff. And so, you got to come in with, whether it's a great package, or really great concept, or really great point of view, something that's going to really compel networks to get in there and bid against each other.
Yep. I think there's two, but to answer both of the questions, in terms of buying defensively, for us, that's dangerous just because it's so expensive for us, and we don't want to spend time, resources, money, or ruin a relationship with anything that we don't believe has a chance. But I think what it can do is competition can gouge the price a little bit, or make you spend a little bit more than you want to, because it is still, at least the way we do things, there's a lot of chance still involved. We hear 400 or 500 pitches a year. We buy 60 to 80 projects, 10 pilots, 10 to 14 pilots, and pick up a few series. So the odds are slim. But if we want to buy something but don't want it to go somewhere else, or if we really think we want it but know somebody else is interested as well, it may go from being a script commitment to a script commitment with penalty, or a pilot commitment, or in some cases episode commitments, which then take up a slot in the fall. And for us, that can be dangerous, because again, we're broadcasting, anything can kind of work, and when you're committing 12 episodes to something, you kind of, you're stuck with it, good or bad. And you're stuck with it on our timeline as well. And that's the other thing, is we don't, we've got a premiere in the fall to a certain extent, and we have to do things along that old timeline. So it makes it a little bit dangerous.
Building on that, do you think that straight-to-series commitments, we've seen so many, it's cool last year, but the year before it was out of control. Do you think that helps or hurt the development process, and does that ultimately hurt the finished product, because you don't really take the time to develop script notes and pilot screenings and testing and all that stuff?
I think I can answer this question by saying it's different, and they'll give you a different answer, because, and I have a specific perspective on this. I'm going to be careful now, knowing it's being recorded. I think for network and the way that we still do things, I personally don't like those large commitments, because of the pressure it puts us under, knowing that we have to premiere at a certain time, knowing that we will have a little less insight into what's being done because they know they're on the air already, knowing that that's going to influence what else we pick up. If we, for example, if we picked up, telenovela this year with Eva Longoria, some of the pickups might be influenced on, does this pair well with telenovela, as opposed to, is this the best show? And not saying that that's what went into it this year or any other year, but those are the kind of things that hurt us.
And you've got Coach, which is straight to series with, granted it's a follow-up, but no script, straight to series.
Correct. Yeah, and that was yes.
Sorry.
Can we talk about the Michael J. Fox show?
Yeah. Michael J. Fox. We've done it a little while. I've been there for 4 years, and it's happened a lot. I will say that actually kind of ties in a little bit to, without giving too much away, it goes into a little bit of one of the previous questions, which is, that's our own studio, Coach. They own the rights to it. They pitched it to us, and they basically pitch us everything first. If they pitch us something that my bosses like, and I wasn't personally in that pitch, so I don't know how great it was, if they pitch us something we like, the studio, because they're trying to make themselves an independent studio and sell to CBS and sell to ABC, has the right to say, we're glad you like it, but we're not going to give a package this good, in their mind, up for just a script. You need to give us something so that I can call CBS, ABC, and Fox and say, we're not pitching it to you. And then it becomes a bigger commitment, and sometimes it's 12 episodes. Now, my boss could also, love Coach. It could have been the best pitch in the world, and that is a shot. I understand why that might be a shot we're taking. But that's, a little bit of a combination of, how competition can gouge prices a little bit, and how we are now, prior to this development season, we have a 12-episode order of something on the air before we haven't even heard any pitches this year.
Yeah, it's certainly a way to stay competitive. I think, in my time at Starz, I've been there almost exactly 5 years. And in that time, we haven't done a pilot yet. Everything has been a straight-to-series commitment. And I think that's, certainly, yes, it's a way to stay competitive. But one thing that I know that we found is that it can be there's a lot of benefits of going straight to series. And I think we found different ways of kind of attacking the development process in a way that's really worked well for us. But I think part of what we found is that you need to be a little specific to the show about what it needs. There's not going to be any one template that works. You have to be really bespoke about it, because what one show needs is not going to be what another show needs. So there certainly are times when we've heard a pitch or gotten a script, and then pull together a writer's room in advance of a green light, and then go through a process of doing looking at production plan and a budget, and then tackling any other questions that we might have about the series, and kind of pulling in all that information, and then based on that decide to go straight forward. In other cases, the 1% or Blunt Talk, Blunt Talk being with Jonathan Ames, Patrick Stewart in the lead, and Seth MacFarlane producing. They came in, they had kind of everything ready to go, so it was less in need of a full development process leading up to it. So it was easy to make it actually a 2-season commitment on that out the gate.
And again, this is all building on everything here, but everything's coming packaging. It's becoming such the norm. True Detective came packaged, Blunt Talk, producers, talent, directors all attached. Does that make the process more easier or challenging for all of you?
Again, I think it's.
Do you like when you get
different.
Everything packaged?
Yeah, it's totally different. We for every project, there are certain projects where it's absolutely the right thing, like the 1%. Coming in with a script ready to go, Ed Helms, Hilary Swank attached, Alejandro Inarritu, Alex, Nico, Armando, the guys that all wrote Birdman with him. And they had a fantastic pitch, a fantastic script. It was ready to go, and that was what was right for that project. On the other end of the spectrum, something that we recently put in development is a young writer who she just had a very specific vision. Again, something kind of almost autobiographical, something she really knows well, with a couple producers that we really like, and so we're developing the script on that. But so it's totally different, and I think you kind of have to see for each project, does this feel like the right team and the right package or not.
What is that, for HBO, is that a frustrating piece?
I don't think so. I think, again, it's like it worked very well. Nick Pizzolatto came in with Matthew and Woody, and you're like, yes, we will do that. But Lena Dunham, for example, came in with nothing, and then there was something really satisfying about putting that together internally, and building the package from there. So I think it works it kind of works both ways. We certainly have to be open to it because it is the way things are going. People are bringing in these packages, and you can't just be like, you know what, no thanks, we don't want all you wonderful people in one room together, so I think we have to be open to it.
I would say from a seller's perspective, because the studio we're buying and then going to sell it, I think it definitely helps. And huge part of my job is finding that idea. And if it's a baby writer who maybe doesn't have the power to get into a network, you need to go find that showrunner. You need to go find that big piece of talent to make it irresistible, because it's very hard to sell. And so you need to make sure there's no little thread or any reason for a network to say no. And
Right.
one way to do that is to make it a super package deal where every piece is perfect. And they can say, we want them, they're great, they're new, let's do it.
Yeah, especially to your earlier point about knowing what we're getting. There is something lovely about you have this young writer who we all can be really excited about, but then the search for that showrunner person who's so crucial to the process, if that comes in already, like, great, thank you.
And what was the pitch with Lena like? Was that a pitch or was it a spec?
Lena was not a pitch nor a spec. She came in for a general meeting, and she came in for a general meeting, which is, seems silly, but we had a general meeting. We were talking about boys and heartbreak and Facebook, and I was a new executive, and she was obviously 22 years old or something crazy, and I was like, it would be really fun. We should write a script together, and I thought that she would just write a script and it would be used for a sample, and she can go staff on something else, and that became Girls. It was like so not a typical process at all. And then as she was writing, we determined she needed a supervisor. Jenny Connor was someone we all knew and loved, and it just sort of rolled into it. But that's a very specific case where something came out of a general meeting. Although general meetings are my favorite for that very reason, because it's true. I ask very inappropriate questions. I don't know how other people do their general meetings, but I dig in because those are the stories, right? Mm-hmm. So she was just expounding on her life, and she's amazing in person and fascinating, and I was like, this would be fun, and it's no stakes. You're 22, whatever, and then it became.
So how do you get in the door for a general?
So how do you get in the door for a general? All different ways.
Did she have a short?
She had done Tiny Furniture, so I'd seen Tiny Furniture, and she was working with an agency. I came from UTA, and she represented at UTA, and so she was working with a friend of mine. So it was sort of that. It is, I would say, heavily representation that gets you in the door. Though we do, we specifically, I'm sure we all do, make an effort to be at the festivals and be, reading everybody, playwrights and we looking for web series and interesting voices, and we're doing our own work, but typically it's your representation that gets you in, that does the initial introduction. That's how it happened with her.
I think it's, at least in animation, I think in live action too, there's a great tool out there called YouTube where you can put anything and it gets you noticed. It didn't exist 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But now all of my friends who are, writers, creators, animators, they ask, well, how do I do it? What I was like, make something, create, go out there and do what you're good at, put it online. Somebody will notice it if it's good and it's worthwhile. Mm-hmm. Put it out there. It sounds daunting, but usually, it will float to the top. The cream will float to the top. And I love getting links from either an agent or just from someone who's like, hey, I saw this, check it out. Mm-hmm. I'll check it out. And sometimes it takes me hours to track down the person, clicking on their link to be like, what's their email? And you email them and you find them. There's all sorts of ways to put yourself out there now, thanks to technology. So absolutely go for it. If you're just a writer, keep writing. Maybe go shoot something. Even if it's a minute, get it online somewhere.
And, to that point, too, HBO just picked up a YouTube show, a comedy, the Goldberg Show. Mm-hmm. What are the challenges associated with developing stuff that's based on existing digital fare? And is that a trend that we're going to see continue?
I'm going to throw this to you. Do you guys know?
I'm trying to think if we've ever pulled something directly from a digital world and tried to develop. I'm sure we've tried to develop stuff. Usually it's not exactly what we've seen. It's you find a creator that way and then come up with a new idea to try to find, all right, let's do this. David and I actually worked for a couple years on something that was called Incubation, that was sort of a joint deal between the Fox network and the studio, where we'd find these great creators, most of them online, honestly, and then do it and pay them a little bit of money to go make us something new, something original.
I think you're only going to see more of it for a lot of different reasons. It's out there a lot more, but yeah, that's what in essence, part of the reason we had put together was when Kevin Riley came into Fox and he kind of looked at the animation slate and said, well, I want to pump this up. We keep renewing King of the Hill, which is a good show, but there's been nothing new. And we just kind of racked our brains, and my sister's an animator, and I had known a lot about it, so I knew that Matt Groening, The Simpsons started as Life is Hell, and then as interstitials on Tracy Ullman, And Seth MacFarlane's RISD thesis was the thing that somebody saw and turned into Family Guy, which you can find online. And, you know, I think I literally remember having a VHS tape of the South Park video Christmas card that I ran to my friend's house, put in a VHS. We were laughing hysterically. And that's kind of what, you know, it was like early days of the internet where we were just kind of passing it around, dubbing it, showing it to friends. And I think we are absolutely doing more of that, where we find stand-ups online, you know, people who are doing short films, shooting stuff with their phone. It is happening. It doesn't necessarily happen quickly, but it happens. I mean, I think, isn't the #1 single from one of the Fast and Furious movies, there's a YouTube singer, a YouTube sensation who's singing on that song. I mean, people are finding these people everywhere. So it's a little, you know, you're putting your stuff out there and you want to make sure it's yours and you're getting credit for it. But I think it's absolutely becoming more and more something we do on a regular basis.
And, you know, we keep talking about animation. You know, Grant, I really wonder why broadcasters other than Fox aren't taking a bigger risk. I mean, especially given the status of current comedy.
I've got a buyer right here. It's a great question. You know, I've had the same question too. You know, aside from cable, where, you know, the deals are a little different because they also like to own everything that they do for many reasons. But you have NBC, ABC, CBS, which are all of them. Even Fox are turning more toward, you know, we want to own our own content. But you can still sell to other networks. And we used to pitch to NBC. We would pitch animated shows every now and then. I think you can speak more to it, but I think at one point they were considering it. You guys developed a couple of them. But, you know, ABC, they tried The Good Family a few years ago. They struck out. I don't think that made them, you know, sort of, they weren't salivating for their next show after that. Same with NBC with Father of the Bride, you know, 10 years ago. I think it leaves a little bit of a sour taste because it takes longer to see anything. You really have to pick up a second season before you've seen how the show performs, just to keep the wheels turning and to make sure that you're not just starting from scratch, which obviously costs a lot more money when it comes down to it. But we would be completely open to selling to, you know, CBS doesn't seem like as relevant a buyer to us because it doesn't, you know, wouldn't seem to fit, but they've done it, you know, 15 whatever years ago. I think it was called Capital Critters. It was a show that was, the first scene, it didn't work, I can tell you. The first scene was about mice. They're in their little farm, they lived in a farmhouse, and the youngest mouse goes off to like see the world. But he gets halfway away from the house and he's like, oh, I forgot something. He goes back, and I'm paraphrasing here. He goes back and an exterminator's come and killed his whole family. This is an animated comedy. And so he's like, so somehow he ends up going from there to living in the White House. He lives with a bunch of other rats in the White House. And it was I think it may have even been Stephen Bochco, actually. Because he had a deal where, you know, they were said, here, make 10 shows, and he made this one. And that was, I think they've developed stuff since that, but that may have been the last one that actually got on the air there.
Yeah. I think, I mean, you touched upon it. I know one of the things I wanted to do when I left Fox to go over to NBC was to do something animated, but the problem is it's fiscally very difficult because in addition to what he's saying about the schedule, it doesn't make sense to spend as much money as you have to spend for a pilot. You have to amortize the cost and kind of pick up series. So unless you make something short and then you're, you know, trying to pick up a series or something based on 5-10 minutes of animation, that takes a year, and people are, you know, trying to get things done very quickly. I mean, when we picked up Bob's at the network, one of the only reasons, among many other things we had to do and change and convince people, was the Seth MacFarlane shows were taking, I think it was 12 to 14 months from page to air, and they had to cut Bob's down. They had to prove they could do it in 7 months, a lot faster.
A little longer, yeah.
So it's hard. It's hard financially to pick up animation, and you have to do it so far in advance. And a lot of times at Broadcast Network, there's a little bit of a lack of strategy in what you're going to do that far in advance. And then you have the additional hurdle of, well, even if we have this, what do we put it with? Because you can't. There's nothing on our schedule right now that lends itself to being next to an animated show. So I would love to. I still love animation. But it's just difficult on a lot of different levels, and they have that block, and they keep feeding it, which is great.
I will say, David's right. Fox had The Simpsons to launch other animated shows out of. You have to find your Simpsons before you can do that. And, you know, I salute ABC for trying The Good Family and NBC for trying Father of the Bride. But it's hard. You do need, it's nice to have a nice pairing there, to have a block of animated comedy. It's really hard to let it live alone on its own, really for any type of show. You want to pair it with something that makes sense. But if anybody would buy an animated show, it's this guy. I know that. He loves animation. He's more responsible for Bob's Burgers getting on the air than really anybody. Certainly more than me. But you guys keep watching NBC. Someday we're going to shove one down their throats. He would love it. I know that. He's got to convince his bosses.
Yeah.
Speaking of NBC, and broadcast as a whole, but specifically NBC has had a really tough time launching comedies. Aside from Undateable.
It's going to take a turn right now,
No
guys.
idea what you're
Zoom in.
Again, my apologies. I'm going to owe you some brisket after this. What do you think the future of broadcast comedy looks like? It's a huge question.
It's such a big question that's hard to answer. I think for me, I might be a little bit in the minority. I still think there's a lot of life in broadcast. I think as long as we have football and as long as, not everybody has cable, there'll be people that are there watching. I think it's quite obvious that the people who are absolutely going to sample is diminishing. That group is diminishing, and that's tough. Broadcast has to change the way that we think about things, the way we do things, the way we produce things, the way we decide on things, the way we pay for things. And because I think the audience is savvy. I think they know we're going to throw 7 new shows up and kind of promote some of them. And you guys don't need to watch unless your friends say it's really good. And the problem is we yank them off the schedule before anybody has a chance to say whether they're really good, and we throw them on quickly. So I think the future of broadcast is that it's going to keep diminishing a little bit, but I think good isn't good enough anymore. We have to be really specific and better, and that's what cable does well. They know who they are. But I think what gives me hope of things like Empire and things like Modern Family, the eyeballs are still out there. Nobody's saying it's network, I'm absolutely not going to watch it. It's just we're not the only game in town anymore, so be better. And that's hard.
Well said, David.
Oh, thanks.
You. That could have gotten ugly.
I'm going to pick on you some more now. So, Undateable, is obviously it's the big returning comedy for NBC, and it's shifting to an all-live format. We talked about this a little bit earlier today, but how nervous were you when you were doing that East Coast, that first one? There was the big scene between Scott Foley and Chris. He had Chris
I don't
down
know
on
how
his
many
knees.
people out there saw it or whether it's still available online. But did you see the West Coast feed or the East Coast or both?
I saw the West Coast, and I sadly missed the East Coast, but I can't find the clip anywhere.
In short, I don't know where it is, but in short, there's a scene where the scene is supposed to end with Scott Foley making a joke that he can have people do things because his eyes are so beautiful, and the joke is supposed to be somebody doesn't believe him until he says, "Take me to the airport and then return my car," and he says, "Okay." And that in the East Coast feed, that's what happened. These guys on that show, and I love them to death, are all extremely talented performers, stand-ups, improv people. And without telling anybody, in the second version, the problem, cut back to, I've seen every taping of this. Rarely, if ever, have they ever gotten through a scene at a taping without making a mistake. So this live thing was, oh boy, what's going to happen? But all of a sudden, Scott Foley starts improv. Of all the people, starts improving. Instead of telling him to take him to the airport, he has Chris D'Elia get on his knees, lean back. Without being too specific and graphic, he's just making him do things, and Chris D'Elia has no idea what's going on. And you can actually hear him say, "I feel like this wasn't in the script." And if you listen close enough, he says "cut" at the end of the scene. So it was, to go back to your point, on the one hand, this is a tough subject for me because I really fought for Undateable get picked up to begin with. It got put on the schedule in the summer, double pumped, which is usually a sign of a death. I did a lot of meetings with the research department to say, this retention is really good. People that know about the show are sticking around. It's not perfect, but it's something we'll want when we have a multi-block. It got picked up again, a bit of a slash budget, mid-season, 10-episode short order, but it did get put after The Voice, and it had fairly good retention compared to other stuff that had been after The Voice. Not great, but good enough in my mind to give it life. But because comedy has been struggling on NBC, my bosses aren't exactly sure, or it doesn't feel like they're exactly sure what to do with it. This live episode was something that Bob has been trying to do. Bob Greenblatt, the chairman of our company, he did Peter Pan live, he did Sound of Music. When he was at Fox, he did the second season of Rock, the sitcom live. So it's something he has wanted to do, and we developed a couple live sitcoms. When Bill Lawrence, the producer of Undateable, kind of said, "Hey, if you want to do a live episode, I'll do it." Bill Lawrence is gung-ho. He's a TV lover. He will do whatever he can. Bless him. Bob said, okay, great. And I think the timing was perfect where Bob went to the taping. He was enjoying himself. The tapings went really well. The response for the live episode was great. And it lined up with when we were making our pickups. And, you know, he wanted to make a little noise and do something big. And when he floated the idea about doing an entire, you know, season of live episodes to Bill, to his credit, Bill's a great producer. He said, let's do it. Let's jump in. That was fun. I, you know, personally, and I'm on record in the company saying this, I wish we, you know, could just treat it like a regular sitcom. I think it changes a little. But that being said, I'm also the one within the walls saying we need to be bold, we need to change chances, we need to do things that are different. So I can't, you know, dismiss an idea like an entirely live sitcom with stand-up performers. So I'm excited to see what they do, but I'm very nervous.
But
No more Scott Foley?
Yeah, no.
It worked though.
Yeah.
It worked. Scott Foley's little improv, you know, may have helped.
Yeah, it worked. They had a little more time to prepare than they usually do, and I hope they factor that in when we're doing the schedule and stuff. But yeah, it'll be fun. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you tune in for live stuff to maybe see somebody mess up, this is the show to do it. Because they will absolutely break, and you'll see it, and so, you know, it'll be fun.
Yeah, and, you know, speaking of Bill Lawrence, who is just terrific, you know, we're currently in the era of the mega showrunner. You know, you got the Chuck Lorre's, the Shonda Rhimes, Berlanti's got 6 shows next season. You know, how does the buying process differ when you're dealing with a mega producer? I mean, do they still have to pitch?
Yeah. They do for us. I mean, there
Chuck
has-
Lorre doesn't just come in and say,
I-
here's what I
well,
want to do and drop
I
the
mean,
mic.
That's-
look,
yeah.
when he does, like, he hasn't. But if he did, we would obviously, like, fill the room with people and presume that it was going to be bought. But, you know, we still hope that they have we still want their passion and their vision. You know, you don't just sort of say, like, you go forth. Like, it's still our money. And especially at HBO, where real estate is so limited for original programming, it's like, we kind of have to know. We do have to know. I mean, they probably don't have to work quite as hard as someone new, but they're pros. So they shouldn't have to.
I think it depends on the situation. I think, yeah, if we were trying to lure Chuck Lorre away from CBS, I think we'd probably have to make a giant commitment where he could just pop his head in and say, I'm doing a show, and we go, okay, bye. But Bill Lawrence has a pod at Warner Brothers, and he pitches everywhere, so he, you know, we passed on it. We picked up his stuff. So I think you do have to come in, but I'm not going to lie. When somebody like that comes in, you're leaning in a little farther because you know they can do it, and it's hard to do. It doesn't mean that's all. I know it looks like that's all we pick up, and I know some people lean on that more heavily than others, but it just makes you feel a little bit safer, like, okay, this guy can at least
Totally.
keep the
It's a
train on the
safety, yeah,
tracks, or
security.
this girl knows what she's doing.
Yeah, I mean, given the network's reliance on these mega producers, I mean, do you think that makes it harder for newcomers to cut through? I mean, there's so few shows on the air that are from first-time writers or first-time showrunners.
Actually, we have a ton. So no, I mean, I think it's, you know, again, it totally depends. Like Kathleen said, it's a great time to be out there pitching things, selling things. There's a lot of appetite for content, you know, and I think that, you know, just because you're a first-time showrunner doesn't mean that you don't have experience necessarily. Certainly everyone that we've worked with maybe hasn't gotten a shot at doing it on their own for the first time, but, you know, we saw something in them. They had a strong vision. They have a lot of experience being on other shows. And, you know, so you roll the dice and, you know, really bet on those people when you believe in their passion and their vision.
You know, we're seeing a lot. The schedule, at least on the broadcast side, is really got so many remakes, reboots, follow-up sequels. You know, do you think that that's a trend
Oh, no,
that's
here we go
going?
again.
I mean, how much of that is just driven by the bottom line, and how much of it is driven by trying to cut through all of the clutter? I mean, there's like 200 and something, like 260 dramas on the air last year.
That's so crazy.
Yeah. Let me put it through the filter so I don't get in trouble. I think what it is, and it kind of dovetails with the question you're talking about, the big showrunners and how hard it is to cut through when you're a young writer. If you think about it in a crude way, when my bosses pick up a series, they are making $20, $30, $50 million bets and that investments, and that's scary, and they don't get to do it that often. So if you're going to do that with somebody who you have no idea whether or not they're capable, or J.J. Abrams, I understand why people lean towards somebody like a J.J. or somebody who's done it before, because then if it doesn't work with which a lot of shows don't, you felt a little more comfortable knowing that they're capable of it. I think we're all still, somebody who found Lena when she was 22, like, Lauren Bouchard had been, kind of doing some cable series. Like, I'm all for finding, the next Carter and Craig who did How I Met Your Mother, or Seth MacFarlane before Family Guy. We'd love to do that. It is just very difficult. And I think when you talk about remakes, what happens is it makes it, in some people's minds, not everybody, but in some people's minds, the marketing's a little bit easier. The awareness is higher because you already know what About a Boy or Coach is, and the testing is a little bit better because people are comfortable a little bit quicker, and there's known commodities, and you know what the brand is. I think sometimes they can be good ideas. I think a lot of the times they may not be, and again, no matter what we're talking about here, it all comes down to the execution and who's behind it and where you're
I think
going.
it's probably similar to, when we develop property books and foreign formats and things like that. That's something, you have a security blanket. You've seen, kind of where it's going, you know who the people are, the tone, kind of have an idea. So while it's a challenge to develop often, because sometimes you want to make it your own thing and tell your own story, there's a security in that underlying property. So maybe it's a kind of a similar.
Mm-hmm. And I think you guys kind of touched on this a little bit, but I mean, something that we saw with Outlander, certainly, I mean, there's millions of people have bought that book and that book series. There's 9 books now, so that's something that you come with an audience that's built in, exactly, that like really want to see this thing brought to life, which is a great thing.
They are the hardest audiences.
Well, and
they're
that's
so
what I was
hard
gonna
on
say,
you.
is that,
if you one misstep,
you need
you're
to get
dead.
it right. Yeah. And that's a challenge, but I mean, it's kind of great. That's something you want to bring this to life. You want to do it right. You want to provide for the fans something that they're going to be happy with and proud of, and really want to come back to every week. So I think it's exciting.
And we're also seeing a lot of similar shows across multiple networks. Everyone wants their version of Homeland or True Detective. How do you prevent making copycat shows while still capitalizing on the latest creative trend?
I don't know that you can prevent it. I think something I've learned, I'm sure we've all learned in these jobs, is that there really isn't a new story. They're always like new versions of stories we've all been told. So, you can throw big worlds at it and special effects and all kinds of things, but at the end of the day, it's like, a basic core idea that we've heard before. So I think it's at your own spin. I think just the idea that you're going to come up with something totally new is false. Like it's okay. That's actually fine. And so just putting your own take on an old idea is like, it's sure there are similarities, but I think if you can be unique enough in your own voice,
Yeah, you're. I've said this to a ton of writers. You're not reinventing the wheel. You're just putting a different shade of paint on it. It's a little bit different, and we all kind of forget a little bit, except for the people that I say it to way too often, is that for us at least, it's sitcom, it's situation comedy. It's a situation that we've been in, that we've seen before, with a different comedic spin. There might be an episode of, Roseanne where she has 2, obligations on the same night, and an episode of Ray and Seinfeld, and they're all going to be different episodes because of that comedic point of view and what they do. I love True Detective, and I'm excited for the next season, but when I boil that down, you've got, 2 cops that don't get along, one that wants to be by the book and the other one doesn't want to be by the book. They go to their sheriff and they try to do something. He says, don't do it. They decide to go around his back. I mean, I feel like we've all kind of seen that before, but they did it in an amazing way. So it's just making sure that, taking a step back and saying, is this copying something that's been done before, or is this just our take on something that's done before?
It all comes down to the same thing of, it's the creator. You want to find that creator who has a voice. I always give the example of, in animation, if you look at The Simpsons and Family Guy on paper, they're the same show. It's a fat, drunk dad, a stay-at-home mom, and 3 kids. But because Seth MacFarlane's vision was so different, his voice was different, he had something to say, and he had a different way to say it, they're completely different shows. And I think ultimately that's what we spend most of our jobs doing, is trying to find that person who's going to take something that may be, grounded enough to be relatable, but completely put a new spin on it to make it interesting.
Audiences thrive on that relatability. They actually, as you love the stuff that feels like your life. You really, just the things that you feel personal about are the things you love, right?
Yeah, it's
so
such
like
a
the
network note,
family,
but it's for a reason.
It's true. It's true.
To the same extent, Blackish, which is another great show, kind of a dumb dad, logical mom, little crazy kids. It's a completely different show because they're saying something, and it's good.
But I think it's interesting. I don't know if you guys have this as well, but it's not even so much just looking at what's on the air, but there's this weird thing that happens for whatever reason where you'll all of a sudden you've never heard. Like I'll just give the example of pirates. Like when we bought Black Sails, never heard a pirate pitch before then or after then. We heard like 6 in the span of 2 weeks.
Yeah, for us it was vampires.
Yeah, just bizarrely,
Zombies.
everyone was thinking about it for some
Zombies
reason.
were
It just
big.
all came in at the same time. And so, I think it is then, when you're looking at that, I mean, on the surface there may be similarities, but what is the point of view of the showrunner? What is the point of view of what they want to talk about, what they want to say within that world is really the important thing.
And we're going to open it up for questions now. If I don't know if there's a mic anywhere, but in front.
Yay.
I was just wondering for HBO, I think you have like a big dominant block on Sunday nights, right? With like Game of Thrones, Deep Silicon Valley. Are you gonna expand that to like maybe Monday nights?
I really hope so. We still only program Sunday nights. We have an hour at 9 and then 2 half hours at 10, 10:30. That's it. So it's that one of your questions on the email was like, what's the most frustrating part for us? It's like we get all this great stuff coming in and we have nowhere to put it. And so I hope, this hasn't been said and I'm probably speaking way out of school and, but this HBO Now thing secretly feels very exciting to me because I'm like, maybe someday we can program there and we haven't been told that or anything, but I hope so much. It would be wonderful. I really hope.
Agreed?
I'm curious, at what point you are no longer involved in the process of developing that show? I mean, being part of that show. So in other words, how do they determine whether or not you're actually successful at your job? I mean,
That's a huge question.
If we had that answer.
Oh my God, it's hilarious.
you might recommend that they buy something, or you might actually buy something, and then the implementation just sucks. I mean, so how much does that fall back on you?
All of it.
A lot.
And that's why
All
when
of
you
it.
get one thing, like I will ride this Lena Dunham wave until literally one thing on the air, you're like, see, I got that one thing, remember the one thing I got on the air? And because there are so many more that you're like taking the hit for, yeah. I mean,
If there's a hit on the air, there's probably 20 to 30 people out there who will take credit for it.
yes,
But for
absolutely.
every bomb, which is more than 90% of our business,
It's usually my fault.
It's one person's fault, and it's
Yeah, are you talking about in series a little bit too, or just in before it even gets onto the air?
Well, in general, because you were talking, for example, that, comedy doesn't do so well on NBC. Well, you're in charge of getting comedies.
Yeah.
You're buying brisket later.
No. I completely understand. I think I don't know how I don't know how much people know here, but literally 2 days ago there was another restructure at my company for who I work for specifically and who I report to, because we see it too. And I personally think, again, without saying too much, I think we need to have a clear vision of what we want to do. I've been there for 4 years now, and I think it's a little spaghetti against a wall, and that's partially because nothing was working when we came in there. There was a Thursday night that a lot of people it was critically acclaimed, but it was not making money for the company, and they wanted to get away from that. But what we wanted to do wasn't entirely clear, and so you buy shows, and like you're saying, you can buy shows from very talented people, and the pitches are amazing, and you get the script, and it's unfortunately just doesn't get there, and it is a little bit of a lottery. It's something that frustrates me about network, that when you don't have a brand, you're kind of trying to do a lot of stuff. But there's a lot of voices, and it's hard. There's so many variables, because if you get the people right, then you got to get the idea right. You get the idea right, you got to get the characters right. Then you got to cast it, direct it, shoot it, cut it. Right time, zeitgeist, marketing. Where does it go? There's just a lot of ways for us for it to not work out. So. That's why.
Well, you're the one who did that, right?
Yeah, exactly. If it all, yeah, I will take credit. Yeah, exactly.
In the front.
So broadcast comedies, obviously, they
What are those? I'm just kidding.
they
Good
obviously
one.
go in waves. Obviously, it's more of like a single cam market right now. But I think also in terms of types of shows, like we saw rom-com comedies, and then now there's kind of like the Kevin Bev grandfather, like new types of families.
Yeah, with the Stamos one also. Yep.
Right. So is that something that the like ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, like you're like, oh, they're doing this, we should do one of this, or is it more we have this gap, we should fill it?
I think what it is, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who asked the last question or when we talked about what you hear, the pirates and whatnot. It's what happens is every year we're done with our pickups and things go to series, and we will have a couple months where we sit back and we go, what went right, what went wrong, what do we want to build on, what do we want to do, what's not on TV. And I think having worked at Fox and knowing we did that, I'm sure ABC and CBS do that as well. Everybody looks at the slate and they go, hey, there's not a lot of romantic comedies. And then the pitches that come in will be a lot of romantic comedies. And next thing you know, we have Marry Me, A to Z, and a bunch of other shows. And this year, it's just, I think what it is people trying to figure out what's not on TV because it gives them a little bit of a chance to say, hey, this fills a void. But it's not it's not a conscious effort to say, hey, they're doing that and it works, we need to do it. I think what it is everybody, we're broadcast and we want the same eyeballs that they have to a certain extent, and we end up doing the same thing. So. Yeah,
and we're seeing it next fall everyone's got new medical dramas because Grey's Anatomy's getting a little long in the tooth too.
Yeah.
When you're looking at shows, is there anything that kind of sends up red flags, either in terms of kind of being too tired or too controversial? And obviously that would have a very different notion between premium and broadcast. But like anything that just kind of like, this could be a problem.
I think it's case specific a lot of the times. When I'm looking at stuff, I'm checking for red flags for what are the networks who I'm selling to going to say? What's a red flag for them? And in the case of Fox, it's very high concept stuff, so superheroes, sci-fi. But I say that and I tell writers that, and then I tell them to completely forget that because someday somebody is going to put that show on the air and it's going to be a huge hit. So you kind of have to start as a creator, as a writer, forget about the box, make the show you want. There'll be a place for it. And I don't want the show where someone's tailoring it for Fox because most of the time it will be very too grounded, very milquetoast, and just a family show with no heart and no original voice to it. So I feel like just go for it. Do the show. If it's crazy, you can always be reeled back in a little bit. So yes and no. Each network is going to have a red flag. It's impossible to know. So that's why you just got to make something that you like.
Yeah, I agree with what he said, but I would say, at least for broadcast network, we still are, selling ads, and there is an entire department of people that have to answer to those. So when we get pitches about shows set in a marijuana dispensary or, some sort of sex store or something, it's just, it's just different. As funny as it might be, unfortunately, that we know in advance we're going to have problems down the line. So those are the things you have to be careful of. We don't want to neuter anything, and we don't want to not take chances and make noise, especially with what we're saying. I think, the Carmichael show that's coming out this summer, I think it is, he's specifically, Gerard, for anybody who knows his stand-up, he is a contrarian and goes against conventional wisdom, and that's what we love about him, and he's going to say some things that might irk some people, but as a whole, I think when you're thinking about doing a show here or there or what you're saying, for us at least, you got to think a little bit about whether this is going to, upset the majority of sales or majority of America.
Right. This will be our last question. No pressure.
What do you think about your place in this current landscape of shows being canceled on one network and going to another? Cougar Town was on ABC and went to CBS, and they probably just went from Fox to Hulu, Arrested Development was gone for 7 years on Netflix. So do you rebuy the show as if it were completely new, or you look back and see, oh, it was really successful or a failure on whatever it will work on or something not?
It's actually a very good question. I think it's great. We have shows like Futurama that can come back to life on another network and do very well on Comedy Central. American Dad just went to TBS a year ago, and it is killing it for them there, and they love it. They love the show. It's a great partnership. So in essence of keeping a good show alive, I think it's great. In the case of Mindy, it was a show that didn't do so well on a big broadcast network. We need to generate really high ratings to keep the advertisers happy. But on Hulu, they can get by with fewer viewers, and it's a very well critically liked show for the most part, and it has a very good core audience. So they're betting that core audience, which is pretty big by Hulu standards, if they get half of that, they'll be very happy, is my guess.
Yeah, I think it actually goes back to one of your first questions, which is that changing landscape and the competition, and it's scary. We're not afraid to say that we know things are changing, and it's a little nerve-wracking. But it's frustrating that we're in a way kind of playing the same game by a different set of rules, and I think we all need to realize that, because like Grant was saying, if American Dad is hemorrhaging money because it's only getting 2 or 3 million viewers on a night where you need more, but CBS can say, I will take half of that, and that's a success for us. It makes it harder for us going, oh, well, do we give somebody else a slot where they're going to take eyeballs away, or do we do this? And so I think it's just about knowing what your end game is, knowing what's a success for you, and figuring out whether it fits in there. And I think Arrested does for Netflix, and I think Mindy does for Hulu. And you know, it's part of everything that's changing and making it harder.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thank you, everybody, for coming out, and thanks to our panelists.
Good job, Grant.